All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer. If you're watching this, you probably already know the theory behind autonomy, but today we are strictly looking at the practical side. We're going to break down the actual strategies and theories for funding autonomous infrastructure, drawing entirely from a really fascinating set of source materials. We're covering everything from the raw theory of mutual aid to the actual gritty logistics of crowdfunding communes, right down to the very real legal risks involved. So let's dive in.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit Section 1, funding the commune, then move through solidarity, mutual funds, crowdfunding, avoiding nonprofit pitfalls, and finally, navigating legal risks.
Starting right off with Section 1, funding the commune, pooling resources for material foundations.
Look, the core problem the literature addresses is super clear. Building a commune isn't just about having an amazing vision or strong solidarity with your affinity group. You actually have to gather the material means to start. The sources stress that under capitalism, financing is just an urgent, foundational step. As the text explicitly states, we have to transform economic solidarity into material foundations. You can't build infrastructure on good vibes alone.
Okay, Section 2, solidarity, not charity, grounding the theory. Before we even talk about collecting a single dime, we've got to understand the theoretical framework underpinning all of this. The sources point heavily to Dean Spade's work on mutual aid. Spade's core argument is that mutual aid is about collective coordination to meet survival needs, mainly because we know the current systems just aren't going to do it. It's about building shared understanding and solving problems together through participatory action. It is definitely not just about handing out cash.
In fact, our sources draw a really sharp line between charity and mutual aid. They frame traditional charity as this top-down saviorism, heavily controlled by elites or the government, which often imposes these gross hierarchies of who actually deserves help. Mutual aid, on the flip side, is totally collective and participatory. It gets to the root causes of systemic issues. So, if your group is raising funds, the literature argues it absolutely must be rooted in this mutual aid framework to stay true to anti-capitalist principles.
Which brings us to Section 3, mutual funds and cooperatives, the math of collective investment.
So, how do we actually pull this off? How do groups pool their money? Well, the sources give us a super concrete mathematical example to completely demystify this process. Imagine a hypothetical starting pool of exactly 2,000 units of currency.
Let's just walk right through the math they outline. Step 1, you've got 20 people in a group contributing 100 units each month. Step 2, boom, that instantly creates your pool of 2,000 units. Step 3, when times get tough, a member can just borrow their share, 100 units, with literally zero interest. And if they need more, they can ask to borrow other members' shares, provided everyone's cool with it. Step 4, they repay it within whatever time frame the group agrees on. What the sources are describing is basically hacking the system to create your own autonomous credit union. It builds material wealth while totally respecting individual autonomy.
Once you have that baseline, maybe your cluster launches a cooperative business, like a cafe or an urban farm. The profits from those don't get funneled up to some boss, they feed right back into the mutual fund. The text suggests splitting this money 3 ways. First, expansion, saving up for buying land or big new projects. Second, running costs, just keeping the lights on. And third, profit distribution, rewarding members based on a credit hour system for the actual work they put in. It's an incredibly smart, self-reinforcing loop.
But eventually, those funds have to be put to use in physical space, right? Groups have a big strategic choice. Do you buy separate land, or do you try to transform an existing neighborhood? The literature points out that while existing neighborhoods are amazing for building immediate community ties, you're going to face massive hurdles from local zoning authorities and pre-existing legal frameworks. Because of that, the sources focus heavily on the pathway of acquiring separate land so you have complete autonomy in governance and design.
Moving right along to Section 4, launching a crowdfunding campaign, platforms and logistics.
Sometimes the internal mutual fund just isn't quite enough, and you have to look outward. The sources dive into campaign logistics, specifically weighing the pros and cons. Using a slick platform like Open Collective? Super easy to run, but you end up excluding folks who don't have internet access or bank accounts. Going grassroots with a Google form or email? Way more accessible, and you can take cash, but get ready for an administrative nightmare. Plus, you have to navigate privacy policies. It's a real balancing act for organizers.
And there are just dozens of platforms out there, from Fundriser to Chimp to self-hosting the whole shebang yourself. But the literature makes one thing very clear. No platform is going to guarantee your success. You've got to carefully match the platform's features, its fee structures, and how it handles receipts directly with your campaign's core principles.
Section 5, avoiding nonprofit pitfalls, protecting autonomy and purpose.
Handling all this money brings up some intense risks of co-optation. The texts explicitly warn us against the non-profitization of mutual aid. If you start relying on foundation grants, those almost always come with strings attached that quietly dictate your work. It breeds careerism, it creates these weird, staff-centered hierarchies, and worst of all, it forces you to rely on hostile state systems like the IRS. Ultimately, the sources warn that this shifts your focus away from radical liberation and turns you into managers of vulnerable people just trying to win elite approval. Absolutely not what we're going for.
I love this quote from the reading because it perfectly grounds us back in the core ethos. Crowdfunding for communes is not charity, it is collective investment. The actual tool or platform you use matters way less than ensuring you have transparent, fair systems. The goal is to keep resources constantly circulating within the community, never accumulating at the top.
Finally, we hit Section 6, Navigating Legal Risks, the reality of state repression.
We absolutely have to talk about defensive strategies, because doing this work effectively makes you a target. The sources deeply analyze the sweeping RICO indictments against the Atlanta Stop Cop City movement. Look at this timeline. The state essentially constructed a massive conspiracy narrative starting all the way back in the May 2020 protests. They used isolated arrests from 2021 as predicate felonies, basically just building blocks, to justify a 61-person RICO indictment in late 2023. The sources highlight this to prove a point. The state plays a very long game when it comes to criminalizing mutual aid.
And honestly, this is the most chilling detail from the materials. The indictment literally alleged that reimbursing a volunteer $11.91 for basic supplies, like glue and food, was an act in furtherance of a conspiracy. It's wild, right? The sources use this to show us that even the absolute most mundane, everyday logistics of organizing can and will be weaponized by the state when your networks start threatening the status quo.
We've covered so much ground today, from the exact math of cooperative credit to the harsh realities of state pushback. But I want to leave you with this incredibly provocative question, straight from the text, because it really challenges all of us. Can we share, sustain, and coordinate resources without falling into hierarchical accumulation? According to the sources, how you and your affinity group answer that question in actual practice is the ultimate test of your solidarity. It is a massive challenge. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep exploring and keep building.